We recognise the Kaurna people as the custodians of the lands and waters of the Adelaide region and pay our respects to elders past and present. We acknowledge and respect the Kaurna people's cultural, spiritual, physical and emotional connection with their land, waters and community, and we extend that respect to all Aboriginal and First Nations people. Welcome back to Amy and I'm Amy Matthews and I'm here today with Millie Heffernan.
That's me.
Justina Ashman.
Hi.
And Payton Hogan.
Hi.
And it is officially spring. This is the first week of spring. The sun is flashing through the windows.
Oh my gosh.
First week of September.
Beautiful.
I know. I'm ready for spring this year. I even missed a lot of winter. I went away for like the worst of winter and got summer and I'm still ready for spring.
How warm was it?
Oh, it was hot. Yeah, it was hot. It was like over 30.
Yeah, there were heat waves all over. I mean, well,
you know, heat waves. Not like an Australian heat wave, but hot.
I was like, if you're interested in the climate of the world, go to Cli-Fi Month. Listen back to some of our episodes.
Call back.
Anyway, we thought for spring we would do a topic that none of us are experts in. So this is going to be really fun.
Yeah, sorry everyone.
Sorry if you are an expert, but we are just exploring this topic.
If you're an expert, get in the comments.
Yeah.
Please.
So we're going to be looking at kind of what we're calling life writing, which is a really broad umbrella term. And so today we thought we'd just sort of talk about what fits under the umbrella, what we've read, some book recs. And it's funny, when we started talking about it, is I read nonfiction for fun because like when I'm writing, I can't read fiction. I know some people can, I can't. I'm existing so much in one world. We've discussed before about how I'm a binge writer anyway. Mm-hmm. So while I'm binging, I can't read fiction. So I just read nonfiction and I'm a bit of a tragic. But when we say what nonfiction would you recommend, my mind goes blank. And then when Justina brought in some books today, I was like, oh, yes, that and that and that and that. So my first question to all of you is, do you read nonfiction? Clearly Justina does.
Yes.
Sorry for those of you listening who are not watching us. There's all these books around us because Justina brought a whole heap of nonfiction books to remind us why we love life writing.
Full transparency, because we're a judgment-free podcast, I have absolutely not read all of the ones I've brought in.
That's
of course.
It's
aspiration. Yeah. We've read every book ever. What do you mean?
Never DNF'd.
I haven't read any of the books you brought in, so you're ahead of the curve.
So, Justina, you're a bit of a non-fiction life writing fan?
Yeah, I didn't used to be, actually. I used to be pretty narrow in what I read. I used to read a lot of specifically fantasy and sci-fi, maybe a little bit of contemporary, but that was about it. And weirdly enough, like we've just come off the back of academic month, but it was my undergrad that really expanded my reading tastes. Like we did a topic on life writing in my undergrad, which I thought was, at the time, I was like, that's not my thing. I'm not really someone who writes about myself. And I really loved that topic actually. And that was my first real engagement with.
Do you think it's
that
we feel like we're not interesting enough to be writing about ourselves? It's what do I write?
You totally would though. Like I think the best nonfiction is so specific, right? And like, you know, when you sit down to have a drink with someone and you ask them questions about themselves, people are fascinating. Like everyone thinks. I have a friend who went to ballet school, like dropped out of school and went to ballet school. And I've always said to her, please write that memoir. It was in the 90s, early 2000s. I was like, I would just die to read that book. I would love, because the stories she has about it are just insane. And she's like, oh, it's boring. It's like, no, to you, because it's your life.
And also I think people think a memoir or life writing has to be a biography. Like they think it has to be your whole life. It's like it doesn't. You can tell a short story about a part of your life that is very interesting.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. There's so much writing that technically counts as like life writing, which is why, this this theme month is like, it's kind of like saying our theme for this month is books. Like,
Yeah.
or actually not even, because there's a lot of life writing that isn't books. That is really like, I would classify a lot of stand-up comedy as life writing.
Yeah.
That's so
definitely.
true.
Oh, like
Yeah.
Net is probably like Hannah Gadsby's Net is one of the
100%.
best pieces of life writing I've ever seen.
100%.
But, you know, writing goes into that beforehand.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Many iterations and drafts and
Yeah.
and also
developments.
it is a book now, I believe, because I have the audiobook.
Mm.
They did make
Right.
Nanette up, like they published Nanette
that
as a book.
blew me away.
Yeah.
Oh,
It's so good.
I saw
It's
that.
incredible.
I saw that live when they were first doing the tour of it and before they'd done the Netflix special. And so we were like one of the first audiences to get that. And
Wow.
so that show was such a shock after the first one that they'd done, because it was like really raw and real and we're like, whoa, this is crazy. But we were shocked, but we walked away talking about it, and we talked about it for weeks and weeks and weeks, which I think is what good writing,
Yeah.
but good life
Yes.
writing should do also. Like you should walk away having felt something.
And also, what's often interesting in any kind of life writing is not necessarily the external events, but just your perspective on it. Like this month, we'll be interviewing Olivia De Silva, and she says herself that she felt like there was nothing wild in the book, but her perspective on every single thing, no matter how mundane it is, was just so entrancing somehow. That was what was interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, getting an insight into how other people think and feel is always fascinating.
Yeah.
Because you think, you have a moment of recognizing yourself in others, but also seeing the alienness of others. This is the biggest compliment I give you, Payton. But when you write questions, I'm like, well, how does your brain work? And I wish my brain could do that.
I also think that like you get so entrenched in your own bubble, I suppose, of experience that you don't realize actually how novel it is to someone who isn't living your life. And I'm thinking now back as in terms of I'm getting my elbows into my creative for my thesis, which is a historical fiction, and the things that I'm most interested in are personal stories from those times. I mean, I'm looking at World War II, which is like a deeply exceptional time period, but also like just I am so interested in the everyday life, in the like mundane details of people's experiences and what they're thinking and feeling and how they're perceiving the world. That actually like I might not think my own perspective is that interesting, but like when I'm reading someone else's, even if it's every day, I'm like fascinated.
I also remember you saying this about other fiction like fantasy and stuff in another episode, was that the stuff that really interests you, and I'm the same, is those very unique, very niche experiences of characters. I'm not interested in a character necessarily that I can see myself in. I'm interested in a very specific experience, and life writing definitely gives you that because everything's so personal and so unique and so specific.
I was going to say, going back a few steps to thinking we're not interesting, I think one of the things that trips me up when I think about writing about myself is feeling I'd have to summarize or make sense out of something. Whereas I think the best memoir for me isn't necessarily trying to summarize a meaning. It's just kind of having, like you said, a perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of it. Like when we talk about life writing, like at the very bare bones of it, you're like, it is writing or like storytelling that is about real life, real people's life, whether it is your own or if it's a biography of another person. But there's so much more to it than just biography, autobiography, memoir. And even those categories are much more expansive than I feel like they seem at first glance.
Yeah.
So I wrote down a few categories and I thought we could kind of tick through them and then you can see if I've missed any. But also if we can think of some books that we'd recommend in each category. So the first one I had was adventure stories and disaster stories. Because there's a lot of those. Like, and I think if you kind of look often at bookstores at the top 10, people love a kind of, I don't know, shark book. Like Hindenburg
with our
disaster,
survivors.
Titanic.
The one about
those
the
kinds of things.
caves. Is it a soccer team that was rescued from the caves?
The Thai soccer team.
They're like a couple books, and I remember people just coming into the bookstore I work at every day wanting that book for such a long time. It was so popular.
Yeah. I watched the documentary and I was obsessed. Like it was just gripping. So I was obsessed with Jon Krakauer's Into Thin Air. I've read that book like maybe 10 times about the 1996 Mount Everest disaster where all these people died. And it was made into a movie I didn't like. You know, love you if you loved it. I know a lot of people love this movie, but the one it's got Jake Gyllenhaal in it, Into Thin Air. I thought it was a bit sensationalized.
Yeah.
But this disaster was really interesting because it was around commercialization of the mountain and people being up there who couldn't take care of themselves when things went wrong. And Krakauer was on the expedition where everyone died and survived. And he was a nature journalist who was already a non-fiction writer who was doing a piece for an outdoors magazine. And that's why they'd paid to send him up there. But he actually had hypoxia, and so he misremembered some things. And so then there are a series of other books by other people who went through it who call him out for misnaming people. And then he had to write extra chapters for re-releases explaining his own medical state, all of that. It was just really interesting seeing the iterations of it and how things have to adapt and change.
I wonder how often that happens with like life writing and biographies and stuff, where somebody writes their story of their life or the story of a part of their life, and then somebody else goes, actually some of that isn't true, or you've misrepresented some of that. Or
it's so messy. You can't really
I feel like it could probably get very messy.
Yeah. Well, it's completely unavoidable, I think, because everyone's going to remember, even if everyone experienced the same event, they're all going to remember it differently.
Yeah, like witness testimony is the least reliable kind of evidence, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so like you can trick yourself as well by telling yourself a narrative of what happened so often that now you're remembering your own, I don't know, your own
life.
Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Every time you remember something, you're not remembering the original event. You're remembering the last time you remembered it. So you're like retrieving memories on memories on memories.
It's like a cassette tape when you used to record things off the radio or a VHS tape where it degrades every time you do it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So it's so interesting. This is so embarrassing because I normally don't do life writing. I don't even really journal or anything for myself, but recently I was feeling so impulsive. There was this journal or a magazine calling for submissions, and I'd just gotten really emo one night and I wrote this whole thing in my notes about my childhood, and I thought, I'm just going to submit it. And ever since then I've been so embarrassed, and I really hope they reject it because I'm like, God, it's so messy. There's so much in there. I don't know how much I remember and how much of that is accurate, but at the same time, those are my memories. And so that is the reality I'm living with.
Yeah, that's like your truth, right?
Yeah.
So
I will say, they don't have to reject it. You can withdraw it.
Yeah. But then the other part of me is like, what if it's really, I want to know if they.
What if it's really good?
What if it's really good?
What if I'm a genius,
I think
actually?
it's bad because I didn't know how to end it. At the end, I was like, that's just how I feel about
life,
all that.
Though. Life doesn't have to have a neat wrapped in a bow ending.
Yeah. Well, I thought this is just really boring. It's just me saying this happened and then this happened.
It's boring.
Yeah, I bet it's incredible, honestly, from what I know of you, Payton. But it's also like, I mean, I think life writing is super, super vulnerable. And then I also realized that I put so much of myself in my fiction.
Absolutely.
In a way that it's not like it's a one-to-one mirror of my own life, but like, yeah, it's just so much of me is in the fiction I write that it's also really vulnerable, actually.
Yeah,
the difference is you're just slapping your name on life writing.
Than a
Do you think?
strict.
I mean, I feel like with life writing, with non-fiction, the line, because it is really vulnerable and exposing writing fiction. Like you do feel like you've put yourself out there, but the line for me is when other people are in it. Like if you're writing about your childhood and family, you suddenly go, "Oh, they're going to read that."
Yes, that's part of why I hope it gets rejected. Because I'm like, I think. I'll have to show some people. I could never put this out without telling them ahead of time. But I hate the idea of them reading it and being hurt by it.
I remember Eva Horning, she was my honours coordinator when I did honours 100 years ago. But she went on to win the Prime Minister's Prize for Dog Boy. She's an amazing writer. But she had a book that she'd written about her childhood. She grew up in this very bohemian childhood in the Adelaide Hills.
Yeah.
And she had to put it in the drawer because she said, it's been published now, but she said she couldn't publish it until after her mother had passed because it was too honest and too hurtful. And so she's like, that just goes in the drawer until a day where I'm not going to cause harm.
Yeah, because it's hard to convince a person that you love them and you forgive them. There's absolutely no ill will, but it is still your story. Like, how do you hold those two truths at once?
I think there is, like, you look at a lot of life writing though, and I think there are writers who can manage to hold those kinds of complexities really, really well.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about, we were talking before the show, but like two of my favourites are Janet Frame and Joan Didion. I think they're both really complicated people who do write about their families, and it's not always flattering, but do it in a way where the love is really evident, I think.
Yeah.
And then there's, like we were talking about also before the pod, there's people who will write, like Carrie Fisher, where there is no holds barred. She just writes the truth. She's like, this is what happened.
Yeah.
And if that hurts you or you have a problem with it, then that's your problem, because this is what happened and this is how I experienced it. So I also really enjoy that kind of writing.
She's really interesting too, because she crosses into one of our other, so she does write straight life writing, but then she crosses into another category, which is autofiction, where people take their autobiographical work, like their life, and turn it into fiction, because a lot of her work, like Postcards from the Edge, is very thinly veiled. It's clearly her life, but she has given them character names. She has made up things. It kind of crosses into a kind of masked truth. And same with all her other work, because she clearly writes about her mother, Debbie Reynolds, a lot, and her grandmother, Maxine, a lot, and being a mother and her kid.
And her husband.
And that whole concept of like what is truth is so sticky as well, because sometimes maybe the like order of events or something might not be true, or the exact dialogue might not be true, but it's like expressing an emotional truth or a truth about how an experience felt at a certain time. Like,
and if it's in the architecture of your brain, then that is still real in a way. It's like, how can you delineate between externally real and then real what is in each different player's mind?
But then I also, when you're doing that kind of writing, how much are you changing? How much are you editing things? Not the truth necessarily, but how much are you moving things around so that maybe you do get that kind of like a closure at the end of a book, or if you're like trying to give a message in your book, how much is too much to move around before then it's like, well, now you are writing fiction.
And that's where the formal devices, like changing the names, and is a signal of like, this is not completely
Inspired
true. This
by.
is my kind of truth.
Yeah.
But I was thinking just about film, because where my mind went when you were talking was to the Elton John film, Rocket Man.
Oh, yeah.
So good, by the way.
About how you can tell a kind of biographical truth, but then use the poetry of the visual medium to get at another truth.
Yeah.
And that film is so interesting as well in the way that it's like structured as a musical kind of. So it's like
Abby would love it.
Yeah.
It's really fun. But
I mean,
makes
she
me
might,
think
because
of
it's just Elton John's songs. So
that makes me think of another
jukebox musical.
musical biopic, which I actually haven't seen, but I'm going to bring it up anyway. It was the Robbie Williams one.
I just watched this in July on the plane.
Ah.
So Johnny started watching it, and then he tapped me. He's like, "Oh, you need to watch this because it's better than you would think."
Yeah.
And it really was good. So they made him a chimp.
Yeah. Which is such an interesting like digression to make when you're like, but in some ways it's like, I feel like doing such a blatantly visual and obvious thing that is a digression from reality is like, just don't worry about what's real, what's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, people got so up in arms about it. Like, why is
I
he
really
a
liked
It's like,
it.
can you listen to any of this man's music? Like, just go with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, it like does these incredible things of like showing how he was, because of his mental illnesses, always felt like a freak and an animal in a freak show. And then also it allows him to play himself, which he could not do.
He did this great. Stephen Fry, a couple of years ago, maybe even a decade ago, did this great series about mental illness, because he's bipolar. And he did an episode where he and Robbie were talking about Robbie's depression. It was so interesting and so good. And it's just so fascinating how the vibes can change when there's so much compassion between the two of them. Anyway, that's another digression.
Carrie Fisher was also on that series.
Yes, she was.
Yeah.
Yes.
That brings us to another form of life writing, and is podcasting.
Yeah.
And so there's a podcast that I really love that's called No Feeling is Final by Honor Eastley, which I listened to actually while I was quite depressed. And it's like so vulnerable and such a tender-hearted but also real look at depression and how it affects people that I was just like, oh, this is like incredible. So yeah, that's my podcast memoir rec, I suppose.
That's interesting too, like the blending. So we've just been talking about celebrities and then podcasts, the kind of slipperiness between the real and the text. Because I was also thinking about Trent Dalton and Boy Swallows Universe, which was huge here in Australia, and how, you know, the fact that it's autofiction comes out in his interviews when he talks about it. And the TV series, I think very much the publicity for it leaned into the idea that this is based on his real life and this is a real life story, and it kind of gave the fiction, because it was a work of fiction, gave it a kind of weight it wouldn't have had on its own, that there's something about adding in the real person that gives it a punch it doesn't have otherwise.
What was the series from last year or the year before about the stalker, the woman stalker and the comedian?
Oh, Baby Reindeer?
Oh, Baby
Yes,
Reindeer.
Baby Reindeer. And then people were horrific to that actress because she played the stalker.
Yes.
But then the stalker outed herself too.
Yeah.
That was
That's
such
very messy.
a powerful
And
show.
also the way people's obsession with like the real stalker was also kind of problematic as well.
Yeah,
like
people were trying to
finding
find
the real
her.
people, which is such an online culture thing.
Yeah.
Anytime someone has a story online, that's a form of life writing, I guess. Just like TikToks,
Blogging.
blogging.
Blogging definitely, but I thought, I was like, I feel like that's not life writing, that's life raiding, where people try and like dig up real people and dox them. And
But the TikToks, the reels and TikToks are definitely a kind of curation of selfhood, right?
Yes.
Like a presentation of yourself to the world or trying to say something.
Especially when they're scripted too.
Yeah, a lot of them are.
It is interesting when like, form and structure and things intercede when you're like, I mean, it's all storytelling, right? And so I feel like, sorry, this thought is inarticulate, but
First draft
thoughts. First draft. But like, I have this feeling that like that we are given like a narrative about how, like a cultural narrative about how life is supposed to go. And it's supposed to have a narrative arc, and it's supposed to have a beginning, middle, and end. And it's supposed to have these specific beats. But life doesn't have a narrative. There is no narrative arc. I don't think like individual lives or history as a whole or any of it has a narrative arc. That is a structure that we impose on it as a way to try and make sense of things, which is really fascinating. But it is, I think there's always a level of imposing a kind of structure that is starting to alter the quote unquote truth. Yeah. Even when you're telling an anecdote to someone, you know.
And I find even this is just, I'm sorry if this isn't related, but you've just made me think of how every negative experience for some reason has to become a lesson. Like if something bad happens to you, it's like, oh, well, that would have made you stronger. Like you would have learnt so much from that experience. It's interesting that we do that as well in real life. We're like doing life writing on ourselves in real time as we're living.
Yeah. And part of it is like a comfort thing. Part of it is trying to make sense out of chaos and things that aren't easily definable. Yeah. But and part of it is just that's the way that our brains are wired from the way we consume stories.
Yeah, part of this is totally unrelated, so I'll be quick, but part of my new thesis is the fact that we will just, because I've been looking into narrative a lot, is the fact that we will just impose narrative onto anything. We build the narrative. That's what we do. You can look at two completely unrelated events and we as human beings will connect them.
Yeah. Just like a blessing and a curse, I guess.
Definitely, I think both.
Yeah.
Equal parts both. So what other kinds of...
So far we've covered some adventure kind of disaster stuff and podcasting. But also you started to get into kind of illness, wellness topics with mental health, I think. Yeah. That's, you know, Payton's research area is wellness narratives.
Yeah. There's a couple. One that we've both started is Unshrinking by Kate Mann.
Yep.
Again, only just started it, but it's brilliant so far. Pretty heavy, but also digestible at the same time. She's just a very good writer.
Yeah. So she's talking about fatness in that one.
Yeah. And her experiences, living in an inaccessible world, and then her experience of losing a bunch of weight, and how it's changed her perspective, or not really changed her perspective, but she's just very transparent about that. Like she can see very acutely how much her life has changed now that she's a bit smaller. Mm-hmm. And another one that is quite similar, that again, I've only just read the first chapter. It's The Art of Love by Sabrina Strings. I'm pretty sure that's the title. That's in the first chapter. It's so fascinating and so horrible to read. It's this black fat woman who was having disastrous dating experiences, and then she started to date this white guy who seemed to be like a super woke leftist kind of dude. And then he does all of these things that she eventually realizes are him being embarrassed about her. Aww. And like embarrassed to be seen with her, or just not realizing how uncomfortable she is around his circle of friends and family, and realizing that someone can very easily project an image of being leftist and being on top of all social issues, but then they're surrounded by people who are the complete opposite, and therefore they are not who they're telling you they are, because they wouldn't associate with racist, fatphobic, ableist people if they weren't also co-signing that kind of behavior in some way. So that's a very powerful book, and I'm really excited to finish that one too, because it's like, similar sort of topic.
So our health and wellness and mental illness life writing, is it always sad?
The topics are so heavy, and yet it's still very readable. I think maybe part of it is that often, these ones that I've read, they're very galvanizing. Like you read them and you're like, yeah, fuck these people, you know?
I don't think they are always sad. I mean, I think there has been a misery porn kind of genre. But I was thinking there's a really good book, and I'm so sorry I can't think of the name off the top of my head. The name of the book is An Unquiet Mind. I feel like her name's Kay. Anyway, she's a psychiatrist who has bipolar, I believe. And she writes the book about the experience of bipolar, like what it's like to live that. But also she has led a rich, functional life and has a relationship, and she's kind of, and I think from memory, maybe half the book's written by her husband. Like it's their two perspectives of the experience.
That's interesting. It's Kay Redfield Jamison.
But I thought that was quite powerful, and I have read others that because I think we inhale these narratives around illness that are often just a tragedy. Like we've got a written story in advance that this is going to be bad.
Well,
and
I was going to say, I feel like it's either end
to
of the spectrum. It's either this story is so sad and depressing, or it's the complete opposite. This person is inspiring. They're a hero.
I feel like, and this is where you have the power of things like memoir and autofiction and this like very personal writing styles, is that often those stories have been told by people on the outside, being like experiencing my loved one who was going through a mental health crisis, or my loved one who was going through an illness, and how it is affecting me. But then when you get these stories, you can see the perspective from within that experience.
It's like true, unadulterated, unfiltered own voice.
And it is a human experience, right? Like it's not an uncommon experience, illness, mental illness and illness. Like we all experience illness or mental illness at some point in our life. And some people have chronic ongoing things which are totally different. But there are some memoirs. So I mentioned Janet Frame before. Her writing is so beautiful. Like I just find her as a kind of craftsperson, an artist, like one of the most beautiful writers I've ever read. So she writes fiction and poetry as well as she wrote these memoirs. So she's from New Zealand, and she was diagnosed with schizophrenia and actually given electric shock treatment, locked up against her will. All these horrible things happened to her. These days, I think she wouldn't. She was then told she didn't have schizophrenia. She'd probably have a totally different diagnosis if she lived now. But she actually had a great life. Do you know that was one section of her life? And to reduce her to that denies her the way she then went to Europe and had love affairs and kind of lived this amazing life where she wrote all these books. And I think often because a memoir is a section of life, if you just picked up, she wrote a whole series of memoirs starting with An Angel at My Table. If you picked up the book where she's hospitalised and you just read that one, that comes to stand in for her whole life, but it's not her whole life. And I think that is also an interesting thing about illness, is the reduction of the person to the illness rather than it being an element of their life.
And we've talked about this outside of, the podcast before, but the idea that like when you look at disability studies, like disability is something that as we all age, eventually everyone will experience that to some level. So
I mean, 3 of the 4 of us are wearing glasses right now. So, we have disabilities.
Yeah.
But people don't think of, eyesight and glasses as a disability. It's like, if you wear glasses, you are wearing a aid. That is an aid.
Yeah.
Because I am like a point off being actually blind. If I take them off, I can't really see anything. And so, like, I think I've said this before, I panic about a zombie apocalypse because I'm like, my glasses get crushed, I'm fucked.
But if it's a kind of zombie apocalypse where you're not supposed to look at the thing, because then, I don't know, maybe like Medusa, you'll
like
be
a bird
fine.
cage or
like it's a Medusa or something.
Yeah. Like the one where if you like hear it or something, you die. But this, like Medusa walking around, you'll be fine. All the sighted people will die.
Yeah. But it's true.
We would protect you in a zombie apocalypse. Amy. We would band together.
I guess what I'm saying is that and I'm being a pain, I'm sure, but there's a whole spectrum that we're all sitting on all the time of needing aids, of aging, of like all of us are like, we like to think in black and white terms of you are or you aren't, rather than us all being in flux.
And this
you
is
can also be disabled for a short amount of time and go back to people, perhaps controversial, pregnancy is a disability.
It felt like it.
Yeah, and I bet I haven't felt it personally, but I've heard that it does feel like that. But people don't think of it that way. And that is a disability that you can have that then is temporary.
Yeah.
You go back to perhaps not exactly how you were before, but you go back to being abled.
Yeah.
But people don't think about it like that.
Postpartum depression as well.
Yep.
Grief is that like serious depression as a result of grief is often a transient or like a temporary state.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of things we go to. Endometriosis comes and goes, like there's so many ways of being human that impede us.
And I feel like one thing, this is kind of maybe slightly segue us into another type of life writing.
Go for it. I'll tick it off.
I'm thinking about like the personal essay and also life writing that intersects with things like criticism and things like, maybe even like journalism and things. That I find really fascinating is when it centers a personal experience and perspective when looking at a broader issue, which in some ways, like thinking about how in Western Month we were talking about how the Western genre, like you now can't avoid the violence of colonialism and patriarchy because it is so in your face that it just makes really obvious and clear the effects of a lot of things like, fat phobia or the institutional and like structural disadvantages like afforded to people who are struggling with mental health or who have disabilities. And then there's also like experiences of like racism. I feel like it feels weird to talk about it as if it's a genre, but like the way that life writing can center the individual, center a personal narrative while looking at big political and social and cultural
Have you read
concepts.
Isabel Wilkerson?
No.
So The Warmth of Other Suns and Caste. She wrote Caste, and it is one of the most brilliant books I've ever read. And it looks at race in the US as a caste system because race is a construct anyway, right? It's made up.
Yeah.
And it's the most brilliant book, and it uses kind of her personal stories mixed with massive kind of historical essays where she goes back into history and looks at lynchings and other things. But that one is such a good example of that, I think.
Well, I think like the reality is we can't take ourselves out of any of it really. Like you can't divorce your own perspective from, even if say you were just doing a factual, just straight historical piece of writing, summarizing, like there's your personal perspective shapes that so deeply. And I feel like life writing, when writers blend genres or explore non-fiction that might have in the past been presented as a factual account or recount of something, but center themselves in it. They're really just making it obvious that like you can't divorce yourself from the
People
way you
think
experience.
there's like this way to achieve true objectivism, and there isn't. Even like in science, there isn't, because a lot of the science that we consider to be absolute truth and absolutely objective was thought up or decided by people who had bias.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So even a lot of our science is determined through bias.
Yeah.
100%. And like, you know, even on a social political level, like what kinds of research get funding, what kinds of research get support, like that's all. Yeah, you can't take the slippery human perspective out of it. So I like when writing that really foregrounds that. And it's like, actually, this is like, I like it, especially in cultural criticism. So criticism around like pop culture, like media, because like, so I feel like I see people trying to present like a very stodgy style of like reviewing a piece of media by being like, this is objectively good or this is objectively bad.
That drives me nuts.
But I love when life writers like blend it so beautifully with their own life and say like, you know, just like you can't extract the way you experience a piece of media from how you exist in the world.
Yeah.
No. And it also is, I like it when people even like a movie review, I like it when people contextualize that with their own life, because then I have something to contextualize that against as well. I think it only makes it better. And as we say, as everyone says, the personal is political. You just can't separate them.
So I've got a few thoughts listening to you, because we've gone through some genres and we still have some to go. I was thinking about history, and when you're talking about bias, about history is one of those areas, as people write, it changes constantly. Like people update it. Like we had feminist history, you know, critical race studies scholars re-looking at history. I read this book, and I don't look, not my area necessarily, so it may not be the best book to message, but I read this book twice because I loved it. And it was Norman Ohler's Blitzed. Have you heard about this? I think it was his PhD thesis.
I can picture the cover. I've never read it.
Yeah, it's about how all the Nazis were addicted to meth and the methamphetamine usage.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
So they sold, it's called Pervitin, and it basically looked like Barocco. It came in a tube, and basically they were all on meth. So the Blitzkrieg, they stayed awake for that many days charging through France because they were meth to the gills. And then it was like they showed these ads from Nazi Germany in the book of meth chocolates for housewives to give you a pep to get your house. So it was like chocolate with a syrup in the middle that was full of meth. And it was talking about the high drug usage in Nazi Germany that we just don't think of. And they're kind of, it's too shameful to talk about now. But yeah, the massive drug usage. And I was
that's the shameful part.
Yeah, I know. Well, but it's like one of those things, secret things people don't talk about, sex, drugs. They're quite happy to talk about violence, obviously.
Sure.
But it was just kind of weird to think there's this whole secret thread of history that totally recast, because it also explains the orgy of violence that occurs too, because meth is a very, it's a drug that triggers violence.
Yeah.
It was a fascinating book.
And on the, I suppose slightly lighter side of it, as you mentioned, like feminist and like critical race theory and these like going back to history and trying to find those like slippages where things have been forgotten or lost.
Queer histories, which you're doing.
Yeah. So there's a book called She and Her Pretty Friend by Danielle Scrimshaw, which is about queer women in Australia's history. But I find that, and I like that she foregrounds her experiences of researching this as well, in the way she writes about them, because it is a very personal thing to be digging into and trying to find these queer histories. And I like that move away from this idea that, we have to find the objective history. We have to find all of this stuff and just be like, no, I'm looking into this because it's something that I care about.
Yeah. And I think that's more, you see more of that in history today, about that centering of the person. So we have history. We had issue books we started to talk about, like we talked about Cape Man. So like taking something like fatness in the body. And then the one we haven't talked about, and I know we're out of time, but when you mentioned poetry before we started recording, that it had not even crossed my mind when it came to life writing. But of course, most of the great poems that I think of. In fact, just this morning, I was thinking, I picked some violets in the garden. Love spring.
That's very magical
Yeah.
of you.
I did.
Very cottage
They're
core.
sitting in my bathroom, very cottage core right now. But I was picking violets and thinking about Wordsworth's Lucy poem, which is just such a short little poem, but is apparently about a girl he loved who died. And that's life writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I remember you used to, this is bringing out my stalker side. This was years ago. You would post like little like flash poetry.
yeah, I did do that for a while.
Yes.
I did.
And they were always so good. And I used to post poetry not because I thought I was good, but because I wouldn't write any other way. And I was like, if I have to post it, then I'll have to write something. But I would read yours and be like, I should stop. Because yours was so
I used to like those little micro poems. They were fun.
Like, something that's so fascinating about how poetry works is that I feel like people get less hung up on the idea of evidencing everything and making sure it's all factual and objective, because poetry foregrounds form in such a way that like people seem more comfortable with allowing slippages around
it's like
what is real
pure
and true.
figurative language.
Yeah.
Poetry is a form of emotion. So it is about
Yeah.
the vibes and it's about the emotion rather than getting all the facts
And the
across. And it is about
silences. And so good at
Yes.
what it doesn't do as well, like leaving the gaps and the silences. You brought a book of poetry today,
Yeah.
Justina, and I can't remember which one it was.
Was it Blur by Thee?
It was the one about, it had a poem about lotus roots
Yeah.
in it, and it had these amazing gaps and spaces that just said so much. It's like, oh, that's a chapter's worth of stuff you're saying with just one space.
Yeah, well, this is where like the very structure of the words on the page or out loud, or like the way the language works is doing so much.
And we're talking about written poetry, but I was saying before that slam poetry as well, which I know people on the internet think is cringe, but get over it. Slam poetry is also life writing, and I just wanted to mention because my favourite poet in the world, Andrea Gibson, died last month.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very sad, but they wrote a lot about chronic illness, but they just wrote in such a beautiful, like every line makes you feel emotion. And this is that thing where, you know, I think life writing, you should walk away having felt something. And poetry, that's the whole point. A poem is supposed to make you feel something or think something.
Yeah.
And slam poetry, there's something about people reading their poems aloud. I've seen a lot of slam poetry. Weirdly enough, I don't know if maybe it's just because of my algorithm, but a lot of slam poetry from immigrants and talking about language. And I think that's so interesting that intertwining it, because, you know, poems are language and they're writing in English, but they're talking about their parents' language or their grandparents' language. And so it's stuff like that and playing with forms like that I think is so interesting. And what makes poetry such an interesting avenue for life writing.
I went to an event earlier in the month that actually was organised by Olivia De Silva and Pink Shorts Press, which was a creative reading, and it was a very intimate one. We were sat around a big table, and it was because it was such a small venue and an intimate style of space. I found it really fascinating to see the way that performance of poetry, especially, worked into it. So one of the writers there, Stephanie Milan, is a local poet, and she read this beautiful poem about which was all about trying to find like the softness in yourself, and that was like so beautiful, and it was like so, you know, talking about family, talking about all kinds of things, but like people think of slam poetry or performing poetry as this very like loud, very you know, it's the scene from 22 Jump Street.
Slam poetry, yelling, angry, waving my hands a lot,
or whatever. Yeah, but I was like,
I'm trying to think of like the
Yeah.
words, but there is like a meme of way to do it of like silly, like rhyming words, you know, very serious and
Yeah.
But it's not what it is at all.
But like I was like, oh, it's incredible how you've captivated this room with such a soft performance and such a quiet performance. That I was like, there's so many levels to the way that you, again, in the meat space,
in the meat space.
perform poetry that affects the meaning, interpretation, everything as well.
I wish I'd thought of poetry. I know I was talking about this before we rocked up here today, because I have a chapbook at home. My neighbour, his name's Malcolm Holmes, and he wrote poetry. He's always been a huge reader. I found the chapbook that I have is called Virgo's Child, and it's poems from like 1975, 1976, but it's largely about his childhood, so like early to mid 20th century. But it's just a perspective that we don't really see much in literature, of this young working class man in the 20th century. And he's very honest about the pressures that he's facing, and masculinity and working and not being able to communicate with other men around you, even though they're the people you have kind of been taught to admire the most. It's, I feel like men don't write enough. I wish they would write more, because it's kind of healing in a way when you're kind of the other and you don't really get much of an insider's peek into what is going on in a man's inner world. I feel like literature and poetry like that is so rare but so useful to understand.
That's interesting to think about genre, because obviously men write a lot, but we often see stories of heroism or adventure or external world.
Yes.
And there is something about life writing, like a lot of my examples, like the adventure disaster ones were men.
Yeah.
But a lot of my examples of memoir are all women.
I also feel like this is where the patriarchy strikes again, because like
we need those people in that room shaking their fists again.
Because like masculinity is aligned with things like objectivity, things like being factual, and this empirical style of like nonfiction of like, you know, they're
control
or informative, like they're the barefoot investor of it all or whatever.
Yeah.
But then women are like, oh, that's the emotive, that's the like wishy-washy. Well, you know, it's like it's the
men also
the genres are gendered.
Yeah. There's also like men kind of dominate sports biographies, and there are also some, I feel like it's mainly physical disabilities. Occasionally a book will go off that's written by a man who's like an amputee or something like that. And it's very much that individualized look of disability, of overcoming adversity and living a life as normal and as fulfilling as you possibly can. But kind of like triumphing despite capitalism and ableism bearing down on you. We love boosting those kinds of narratives.
But it's like what we were talking about before, right? Because we have such a long literary history of male-centered narratives. Like our idea of how we were talking about seeing narrative in everything, like a lot of Western narrative structure is like a lot of the canon that builds our idea of story is this very male-centered narrative. So then I feel like I wonder how much of that just like bleeds into the way men perhaps perceive their own lives, or feel they have to organize their own lives to make sense of it into that narrative, where people who are writing from outside that white male perspective are in a no man's land of like, if your story hasn't been told, if the way your stories have been like told is not centering you, then like you have to almost invent the wheel and figure out, okay, well, how do I even talk about this experience, because it doesn't fit this structure.
Such a neoliberal pick yourself up by the bootstrap survival of the fittest thing. It's like, oh, now I have survived, I am the fittest, now I'm going to write a book about it. But if you're someone who fundamentally cannot do that, then...
And then thinking about the ending, because we're going to have to wrap the show in there is no conclusion, right? Like, so they're saying, here's where I'm ending the book, on this high point where I've conquered it, but actually you're not at the end of your life yet, and you're not going to conquer it in the end. There's a cheerful thought for the end of the
it can always get worse.
Well, this is the other thing, is that I feel like one month we do have to talk specifically about apocalypse fiction, which I love, but also like the idea of an ending at all is like there is no ending, because like even after you pass, like your family, you're so entrenched in the lives of people around you, or like, I don't know, it's just
and
like
your books are on the shelves, people.
Yeah, like things keep happening. That's why there is no narrative arc to the world, to life, because
there's our take home for the
things
week.
keep happening is like the episode title.
Things happen so
it's just
much.
one thing after another.
Especially on this show. Thanks for joining me. I had a thought we can edit this out if no one wants to do it.
Yeah.
If you do want to do it, let's do it. Thinking about those little micro stories and poems I did, Payton.
Oh,
Why don't we have a month where we challenge people, if we put a couple of examples up, that people could share us and tag us in their little micro life stories.
That's such a good idea. That's so much better than what I thought you were going to do, which is get us to improvise everything right now. I was like, no, Amy.
Not that me. Because actually a lot of those ones I did post years ago were life stories. They were from my life. And they were little, I did little
Flash
image
fiction.
They were.
Yeah.
Flash non-fiction.
Flash non-fiction.
Flash life
Flash
writing.
autofiction.
So let's do some little
Yeah.
fiction
good
/
idea.
life writing tiles. So we'll put some up to show you what we mean, and we'll have a hashtag we'll make up. I don't know. We'll stay tuned. And everyone, if you want to join in, you can post your own and tag us and we'll share. And then the other thing I need to tell you is that we're going to continue this topic kind of for the rest of the month. It is spring. We've just gotten through a dark winter, and so we've not really planned next week. So I can't tell you what we're doing next week, but it'll be something to do with life writing, and it will be amazing. And you'll get to see Abby and Harry and the beloved members we don't have here today. But until then, I do need to tell you what our book of the month is, which I have probably announced on a reel online. This is how organised I am. But just to remind you that this month is Fiona Wright's The World Was Whole. So if you need to pick up a copy and get reading before our book club at the end of the month, it is an amazing piece of work. I love Fiona Wright. I had not read this. Justina picked this book, and I started reading my copy yesterday, and I had to make myself put it down so I could answer emails because I got sucked in and could not stop.
She's an incredible writer. And unfortunately, I haven't put the book at the top of the pile, but we also are interviewing, as we've mentioned earlier in this episode, Olivia De Silva.
Yes.
Not
Definitely
next
read
week,
that.
but the week after. So if you want to go pick up Plastic Budgie, we loved it.
It's not very long. You'll smash it because it's so readable.
Go pick up Plastic Budgie so that you can read it and have that context when you watch that interview.
Yep.
Milo flavoured instant noodles. That's all I need to tell you
Stay
about that book.
tuned to work out what that means in the next few months. So join us again next week. Thank you, Millie. Thank you, Justina. Thank you, Payton.
Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.